Thanks for coming to the last session of the day, everyone. So you've done pretty well. What are you now? Day 3. So usually about day 3 of a conference, people are starting to nick off early, get into the beers early. They get all the good sessions out of the way on Tuesday, and then, of course, you're here on Thursday, last session of the day. You're unfortunate enough to have decided to come to prevent unwanted and embarrassing leakage with Azure Information Protection. Maybe you came here just for the title of the session, I don't know. But for those of you that don't know me, my name's Macca. I'm a Principal Program Manager for the Asia Pacific region for the Azure Information Protection product as part of the Customer Success team. So I look after helping our largest customers to deploy Azure Information Protection. And today I have with me Mr. Richard Diver. How are you, sir?
I'm Richard Diver. I'm a Solutions Architect for Ignia, one of the partners that's delivering this great solution.
Cool. So what we're going to do today is take you through a bit of an overview of Azure Information Protection, where we have come from. So we'll talk a little bit about the history of what led up to Azure Information Protection. We'll show you what the product can do today. We'll talk about what's coming in the future to a certain extent, and just get you across what you can do with Azure Information Protection if you so choose to use it. Alrighty, so just a framing slide, just so we're all clear on where this particular product sits in the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite. We basically sit in the middle. So there's a lot that goes on in this particular slide, and it's a fairly complex set of products. There's lots of products in there. They're starting to talk to each other, everything from identity-driven security with Azure AD, all the way down to what we do at the data layer, managing the mobile device, managing what users are doing with SaaS applications and so on, and then, of course, detecting threats on premises with your domain controllers. And we sort of sit in the middle of that, and we're integrating with everything around there as well. Now, when we talk about Azure Information Protection, this slide really fundamentally describes what Azure Information Protection purports to do. And the question we have for you is, how much control do you have around the data in your organisation? And traditionally speaking, most people in the olden days, or even up to today, had most of their information on premises. You know, they had firewalls, they had perimeter protection. They generally felt fairly comfortable about what they were doing. You knew where your data was, you knew where it was going, you had a lot of control over it. And then, over time, we ended up with scenarios where more and more of our customers and more of our employees have started having a more mobile experience. So devices came into play. People were using many different kinds, whether they were iOS devices, Android devices, Mac devices, Windows devices. And maybe that one Windows phone that poor unfortunate person was forced to buy because they couldn't afford any other contract. And at some stage or other, you had to start thinking about how we were going to manage these, because data was going to flow onto those particular devices. So, of course, we had to think about device management, managing the mobile devices, ensuring that only people got access to what they needed to access based on conditional access policies and so on and so forth. And we have a sort of a managed framework around that, and we can still feel fairly comfortable about where the data is on that device and what it's doing. And if the device should get lost, we have some kind of control over ensuring that the device is detonated. But then there's this new normal, this unregulated area. This is the stuff that you don't know, and this is the area where Azure Information Protection is going to help you. This is data that's living on USB sticks, on portable hard drives, on people's personal machines because they've downloaded them from your corporate network onto their own environment. And you have absolutely no control around that data at all. If you have no control over that data, and you don't even know where it is, or where it may be in the world, how do you know who's accessing it? And how do we protect that data from its inception all the way through to when it's no longer necessary and can be removed? This is where Azure Information Protection plays. Azure Information Protection is a product that will allow you to birth your data in a protected fashion, ensuring that no matter where it goes, no matter what device it's on, no matter where in the world it ends up, only the appropriate people can access that data and work with that data. So how do we actually get there? Azure Information Protection has actually been around in one way, shape or form for a very long time indeed. Who's heard of Active Directory Rights Management Services? Of course, lots of shows of hands. Who's heard of Azure Rights Management Services? Beautiful. So ADRMS, Active Directory Rights Management Services, has been around since Server 2003. In 2008, we updated it. In 2012 and 2012 R2, we refreshed it. And in Server 2016, we did absolutely nothing to it whatsoever and just left it in the product. And I would argue that we probably won't do a lot with it from this point onwards either. ADRMS, Rights Management Services, is all about protection of data. It gave us the ability to encrypt a document and add on to that encryption an access control mechanism that allowed us to determine which users in the organisation were actually able to decrypt that data and work with it. And if we had applications that understood rights management services, such as Office and certain other third-party products where we had add-ins written to us, we had policy enforcement. So we could say, for this particular document, Bob can open it, and when Bob's inside it, Bob can read it, Bob can potentially maybe change it, but Bob can't copy-paste, Bob can't print, Bob can't do anything like that. We've had that for quite a long time. When we released Azure RMS, what we effectively did was we ported the idea of having a rights management services on-premises solution into the cloud. So we gave you the ability to do protection from a cloud-based service instead of having to stand up an Active Directory rights management services cluster in your own environment. And who has actually stood up an Active Directory rights management services cluster in their environment? Give us a show of hands. I'm so sorry. Because it was just awesome fun, wasn't it? Exactly. So getting into Azure made it so much easier for people. And when we brought out Azure Rights Management, we also extended rights management services to be able to do monitoring and responding. So not only did we have the ability to protect documents, but now what we could do is we could share them out with other people, and we had a tracking capability. So you could share out your document with your business partner, you could then open up a tracking website, and you could see how often your business partner had attempted to open it. You could see how often they'd failed to open it. You could see how often they'd forwarded it to somebody else. And you could see how often that other person tried to open it as well. And you could even go so far as to look at a map of the world to find out where in the world the access attempts actually happened. And then, of course, we get the ability to do document revocation through here as well. So the idea that the document has escaped, even though it's still secure, we no longer want anyone to open it. We want to destroy that document. We want to time bomb that document. But we were missing one crucial piece of the puzzle. And unfortunately, we were very much an IT-driven exercise. Actually getting this done wasn't simple. If you wanted to actually protect a document, whether it was ADRMS or whether it was Azure RMS, you had to go into the backstage view of Office, you had to go to protect document, you had to go to connect to rights management services, you had to wait for that to connect, you had to wait for it to fail once and try it again and work the second time, and then all of a sudden you'd have a whole bunch of templates. And the problem with the templates was that the end user was not responsible in naming those. So the average IT person would go and create a whole bunch of templates that had different settings and different security layers and name them different things, and the end user had no idea what it was they were supposed to pick when they wanted to grab a template, so it wasn't a particularly nice way to go. So what we needed to do is we needed to round this off. And the way we wanted to round this off was with classification and labelling. And in order to do that, we bought a company. We bought a company called Secure Islands at the end of 2015, an Israeli company, and they gave us the ability to do classification and labelling of data. And this then gave us, effectively, the key to the entire information lifecycle. So with classification and labelling, we now had the ability to classify a document according to its sensitivity of information. And upon classification of the document, we would then label the document with custom metadata that would enable other DLP systems to work with it. Additionally, when we classified a document, we had the ability to go and put on some visual markings to that document. So add a header, add a footer, add a watermark. And optionally, also go and apply an encryption template straight away. So now we could create a label that might say, for instance, confidential executives only. And instead of the end user, when they're creating some content that needs to be for the executives only, having to figure out themselves exactly what template that referred to, etc., 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 they could now just click a button in the toolbar, would automatically apply the appropriate visual markings, the appropriate encryption template, and then hallelujah, we had a document that was ready to go. So this is what Azure Information Protection is all about. So with Azure Information Protection, you get a number of capabilities. Firstly and foremostly, we get classification. We can add automation to that classification. Automation is particularly important to us, and I'll talk about that in a little more depth in a moment, because that allows us to get away from the idea of users having to manually click a button to classify their data and fundamentally get it wrong 70% of the time. We have protection capabilities, we have reporting capabilities, and of course, most importantly, we have collaboration capabilities as well. So the idea is that I might create some classified information, but I'm still going to need to collaborate with other people in my team and potentially with other people in a partner organisation as well. We have those capabilities built into AIP also. So let's start with what classification looks like. We're going to go through these slides at a reasonably rapid rate because we've got a fair bit of demo that we want to play with here. Firstly, begin your journey by classifying your data. And the idea of classifying data is that you want to label it with a classification label that describes the type of data that it is. Now, with Azure Information Protection, we ship with a bunch of default classifications and default labels that you can either choose to use or you can choose to trash and create your own. And the labels that we ship with represent a whole bunch of information we got from a number of our really early private preview customers around what types of labels made sense to them. Excuse me. If you look at what we ship with personal, public, internal, restricted, and confidential. As we said, what we can do with these labels is we can change them, we can use them, and we can also associate them with automatic rules that will automatically apply that particular label based on the type of content that we find inside the document. We can also associate various other actions with a label, such as pulling in an RMS template and encrypting the document, or also potentially adding some visual markings to that as well. In terms of the user experience, there's 4 main ways in which a user interacts with a classification. The first one is automatic. Automatic classification is where we look at the document for certain pieces of information, and when we find it, we immediately classify the document with the classification that matches the stuff that we're looking for. For instance, you might say, all right, well, if I find 5 credit card numbers in a document, I want to automatically classify that as confidential. And we have a whole bunch of rules built into the system that will look for things like credit card numbers, like SWIFT codes, like IBN routing numbers, like IBAN numbers. And of course, because the US is the centre of the universe, the US Social Security number. We also have the ability to build our own queries into the system. So if we're looking for certain project names that might be confidential in a document, we can catch those project names and we can assign a classification straight away. We can also create our own regular expressions to find stuff as well. So if you ever needed to find a Medicare card, for instance, you could create a regular expression, put that into the system, and then have those actions taken automatically. And the idea behind this is the end user doesn't need to think about this. I've stuck a credit card in the document. I don't need to think, what should I label that as? Should it be confidential? Should it be highly confidential? Who cares? We found that. We automatically label it with what you need. User doesn't have to care. The second capability for the end user is recommended classification. Recommended is the same type of deal as automatic. We use rules to find the data automatically, but instead of immediately classifying it with the classification that matches the rule, we pop up a little tooltip to the user saying, hey, we found a credit card number. You should go and label this as X. And the user can choose to do that or choose not to do that. And the reason we do this is because if you rely too heavily on automatic classification, you can sometimes get false positives. You might have a project called, let's say, Project Cairo. And someone creates a document with the reference to the name Cairo. And that reference might be something to do with Cairo the place rather than Cairo the project. You don't want to start labelling everything as highly confidential just because we found one word that may or may not be associated with that project. So recommended is a way to get around false positives. Reclassification is something that's important to people too. So if I have a document that's classified as highly confidential, let's say it's some financial figures, and the company then releases those financial figures to the market, they're no longer highly confidential. So an end user might need to reclassify that financial document as now public. So we have the ability to reclassify. Of course, when we reclassify and step down from a level of high security to a level of lower security, we probably want to ask the end user why they did that. So reclassification also has a justification capability built into it that brings up a little dialog box to the end user saying, hey, why'd you go and change that from highly confidential to public? And the end user can type in the reasons for doing it. And there's a benefit to that because the end user then can't turn around later on and say, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't realise I was bringing it down to a lower security level, because you can then turn around and say, well, actually, you did know what you were doing because we popped up a question for you and you typed in what you were doing. And then the last classification user experience we get is what we call manual. That's where the user, inside their Office client, clicks a button to indicate what the classification is. And I'll show you what this looks like in just a moment. So when we apply a classification to a document, it labels that document or that email with that classification. And the labels are persistent pieces of metadata that travel with the document. So when I click the confidential classification on a document, I will write the metadata to the custom metadata field. If it's an email, I'll write the metadata to the mail header. And we write those labels in clear text. And the reason we do this is because we have a whole range of other DLP engines out there in the wild, not just our own engines, but of course other third-party engines that may want to be able to read that data and take some action on it. For instance, I might have an Exchange Online DLP rule that looks for a document attached to any email that might be marked as internal, and we want to stop that from going outside the organisation. We can do that because we can read the labels that we attach to the documents and we classify them. Once you've got your classification done and once you've got that deployed, you can then start thinking about which classification labels actually need protection of the document as well. It's perfectly acceptable for you to build a classification framework, deploy that with Azure Information Protection, and just stop there and never actually encrypt any documents. Maybe just using that as a classification framework for use with other types of engines to work with. But certain pieces of information may need protection as well. With protection, it's pretty standard stuff. It's the protection that comes out of Azure Remote Rights Management Services, but potentially also out of your on-premises AD Rights Management Services cluster as well. We have the ability to integrate not just with the cloud RMS service, but for really, really toxic data, that 1 to 2% of the data in your organisation that could bring it to its knees if it got out, we have the ability to refer to an internal Active Directory RMS cluster to encrypt it as well, so that it can never leave those four walls of your organisation. Just building that slide out. Whoops, a bit too far, there we go. Basically, this has been around for a very long time. When we encrypt the data, we essentially include an authentication requirement to that data, so that when the user tries to open up that particular document, it requires them to authenticate in one way, shape or form, whether that be actually putting in a username and password or whether doing a pass-through authentication to Azure Active Directory. And then once we've done that and we've proven who we say we are, we can decrypt the document, and then depending on the type of document it is, we get a certain amount of rights enforcement within that document. Now, we don't support rights enforcement within a document for every single document type. The application that you're working with needs to be Rights Management Services aware for us to actually do policy enforcement within the document. And if we don't have that capability, then we can encapsulate the entire document in an authentication wrapper, still getting the encryption, just not getting the policy enforcement. How does the protection work? Basically, I'm not going to go into great depth on this one now because we have a lot more stuff to show you, but essentially, the way this is done is you take your piece of information, something you care about, you take a key, you put a license inside it that requires the authentication, we encrypt the document, and then there's a wrapper around the outside. If you send me a protected document, I double click on it, first thing that happens is that it wants to authenticate and say, is this person, or is this the person who was sent the document, the person that should be able to open it? If I can authenticate it, I can then open it, and then the question is, what am I allowed to do with it? And we pull that from the license that's attached to the document. Now, this all gets done locally on the machine. This is not a you upload it to the cloud, we process it and send it back methodology. Everything's done locally on the device no matter what that is. And so the apps are used to protect and enforce the use rights. There's an SDK, there's an API. There are partners that have built additional products such as Secure, who wrap around the outside of SAP, and Foxit and so on, who use our SDK and API to embed this kind of functionality within your applications. There's also an ecosystem there, so if you have an internal line of business app and you want to be able to classify, label and protect, then we're going to be able to provide you with an API to plug in and be able to do the same things that we can. But it's particularly important to understand, we never, ever, ever see the content itself. All we ever see is the use rights information, and that's it. We get that question all the time. We never see it. We give the client a key, we give the ability to protect it, but we never see the content. So that's just sort of answering that question proactively. So it's all very well for us to be able to classify and protect our information. How do we report on it? We've got a number of ways we can do it, and we've talked about this already. Monitoring and responding can be done through the tracking portal. So the idea here is we've got Sue, who is sending information, a piece of information that's encrypted, to Bob and Jane. So with the tracking portal, we can see that Bob has accessed this from North America. We can see that Jane has accessed this from France. And what we can also see is that Jane has gone and forwarded this particular document or this particular piece of information to a competitor called Joe in the Ukraine. He's probably going to manufacture some parts at a much cheaper rate than anyone in North America can do. He's probably backed by another country. Better stop because I'm being recorded, aren't I? So I won't go any further there. But we can see that she's gone and forwarded this, and we can see that Joe in the Ukraine has tried to open it, and we can see that it's failed. So now we have the ability within that document tracking portal to hit a button that says revoke access. Jane no longer gets access anymore. Obviously, Joe never had access, but we have that ability to protect that data. Other capabilities around reporting. Whenever we do anything in the client, we write that information to the local event log. So we can see whenever anyone classifies a document manually, automatically, what the classification was, whether any encryption was assigned, and we can take all of that data and we can forward it to a CM system and have a look at it there, such as OMS or Splunk or something like that, and build customised dashboards using Power BI, whatever it is that we've got to do. Right now, as we said, that information for the most part is on the client. The Azure RMS service has a whole bunch of logs as well that you can query directly from the cloud, but we are working at the moment on bringing all of those logs into the cloud service, and we hope to see that sometime towards the middle of the year. But right now, if you want to get that real detailed information about what the end client is doing, then you need to get that out of the local event logs, put it in somewhere where you can query it, and go and query away. When it comes to collaboration, when you do the sharing, here's what actually happens. So in this scenario on the slide, let's build it out, we've got Sue who wants to share a document, but in two different ways. She wants Bob to be able to view the document and print it, so it goes up to the top right-hand corner there for an internal user. And she wants Jane to be able to edit the document and print it. And so basically this one document with a use rights policy that lists out Bob and Jane and their respective rights goes to each one. This requires the user to authenticate. We have apps for all the different platforms, iOS, Mac, Android, Windows, and so on, which allows you to consume that protected document and apply authentication as well. The sharing works whether you've got, obviously with the sharing we use Azure Active Directory, whether that's a full sync or a partial sync, only based in the cloud, or whether it's an ad hoc sign up somewhere in the world. My mum can go and sign up for a free tenant on a free user, and I can then send her RMS protected documents, and she'd probably tell me to go and get a life, which she has done many times. But she can do that if she wants to. We don't restrict you to having Office 365 in place in order to do this. We have a way for you to consume protected content, irrespective of whether you've got an Azure Active Directory tenant or not. You can get one set up easily, even if it's for individuals. Then you can claim that domain name associated with it later on. So how's the thing actually put together? If we look at some of the architectures around this before we delve into the demo, what you can see here is we have essentially Azure Active Directory being our authentication mechanism. So if you want to use Azure Information Protection and you haven't yet got your identities into Azure Active Directory, then stop, forget about it, put it aside for another day, and go and sort out Azure AD. We can't do Jack until we've got Azure AD to authenticate against. And the reason we need this is because we build the policy for Azure Information Protection in the Azure Cloud Service itself. When we authenticate successfully to our Azure AD, the client that we put onto our systems that allows us to work with Azure Information Protection will go and download that policy and apply it to itself, and then we can work with it. No Azure AD, no Azure Information Protection. Now, I'm not saying you've got to have Office 365, I'm just saying you've got to have Azure AD there somewhere. Office 365 obviously can be utilised with this sort of stuff as well. And we also supply you with, of course, the Azure Rights Management Service in the back end to do any optional encryption that we might use. When you set up Azure Rights Management Services, you'll get a key that gets generated by us, and we will manage that key for you. Okay, we'll roll it over, we'll do everything that we need to do. And if you don't like that and you want to bring your own encryption key to the service, you can do that as well. You can whack it into Key Vault, work just perfectly. You can have it backed in software, or you can have it backed in HSMs. You can create the keys on an HSM in your environment and then upload it to our HSMs if you want as well. The benefit of doing that, the massive benefit of doing that, is that you get to charge a free trip to the US to your company to go and actually transfer those HSMs on the smart cards into those HSMs in Redmond. Worth it? Definitely. What I will say is if you are going to go to Redmond and do this, there's a really good hamburger restaurant not far away called Red Robin. I guarantee you should do that, and I think you should order the Onion Ring Tower of Terror. This is probably meaning nothing to anyone in the audience right now except for those people in the front row over there. But guarantee if you go there, the Onion Ring Tower of Terror, you will leave a different person. And very much an unhealthier one, but it is awesome nonetheless. And then we also have the ability to protect our on-premises stuff here through the RMS connector. So if you've got on-premises SharePoint, if you've got on-premises Exchange, or if you've got on-premises file servers with a file classification infrastructure installed, that was hard to do in one breath, you can have the RMS connector on-premises, which will allow you to essentially encrypt any of those documents simply by acting as a proxy into the Azure Rights Management Service. Of course, those on-premises applications, they think they're talking to AD RMS, but they're not. They're really going into Azure RMS via the RMS connector. We also have one other topology type for highly regulated environments, and we call this the hold your own key scenario. Now, a lot of people out there have got confused with what hold your own key actually means. The majority of people seem to think that hold your own key is a new version of bring your own key, and it couldn't be further from the truth. Bring your own key is about generating an encryption key and uploading it to our service. We don't get access to that key, we can't back it up, we can't restore it. If the key gets corrupted, you're stuffed if you don't have a copy of it yourself to reload up. That's bring your own key, putting it into the service and allowing our service to encrypt and decrypt with it. And that's great for 90% of the information that is being shared internally in your organisation and potentially being shared externally via encryption to other organisations. But there is always going to be that very small amount of data, as I mentioned before, that is toxic to your organisation, so that if it got out, it could cause some pretty major harm. This is the data that you are never, ever, ever going to share outside your organisation's four walls. You're never going to give it to a business partner. You're never going to do anything like that. We have the ability with Azure Information Protection, when you click a certain classification, to associate it with an on-premises AD/RMS cluster. So you all get to go through the exciting pain of building one of those, except for that gentleman over there who's already done it, and redirecting that 1 to 2% of data when classified that certain way to that on-premises AD/RMS cluster to lock it down and ensure that it can never go outside your environment. Now, when it comes to key management, I just left this slide in here just to give you an idea of the different ways we can do key management, even though I've talked about them all already. So we'll just build that out there. This is really here for your benefit if you download the slide deck later on. But basically, we've got two ways that the keys can be generated. Right? We can generate the key, or you can generate the key. And we really have to think about where that key is stored. So if Microsoft generates the key for you, we can either store that inside Azure RMS using the old style Azure Key Service. You can go and generate your own key and upload it to Azure Key Vault directly inside Key Vault, which is effectively being created by us. And the other way we can do it is we can upload our key that we've generated ourselves to an Azure Key Vault HSM, which is the BYOK scenario that we've been talking about before. Now, as you can see on that slide, all of those different keys are in the cloud, and then when it comes to the hold your own key service, that's happening on the customer's premises completely. All right, so before we get into the demo, this has given you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what Azure Information Protection is all about. I wanted to hand over to Richard to give us a few insights into how Azure Information Protection has been deployed around Australia, and then we'll dive into a bit of a demo fest to show you what the thing actually looks like and how it works in practice.
Thank you very much. Cheers. Okay, so how many people have actually started to install and look at this Azure Information Protection already? Raise your hands, just a few. Okay, so hopefully you're in the Yammer group. We'll mention that again later. So there's a Yammer group to go and talk about all this. You can ask questions, give feedback, and through that we found there's a lot of misunderstanding about maybe when you first deploy it. So what I'm going to show you is really a nice simple approach you can take back to your own company, or you can have me I'll come and help you do it yourself. So one of the first things you need to do is not get straight into the tools and start playing with it and start to try to develop, because that's kind of what we do as technology experts. We just like to get straight into the tools. When you work this into the business, you've got to start right back at the business and try to understand really where is their documents coming from, or where are they coming from. So I've got this nice little slide along here where we go, what is the life cycle? So you can work with each individual department within your company and ask them, where do you create your templates? Is this something that's being copied manually? Is it maybe an export out of a database into a CSV file? So that might want some automated protection on it. Do you have, in government, where I've done a few of these deployments or started to look at these deployments, the templates are there. We already know what the classification is going to be once it's filled in. Some are very rigid, and you can just use those existing processes. Then we look at where are we storing it. So where we storing these files inside our network is great, but if that file can be taken out of SharePoint and put onto a thumb drive, I can download 10 copies of it and distribute it freely. Then we might want to protect that as we create the document or as we take it out of the storage area. Then we look at how we're going to collaborate. So Office is one of the, obviously, the major components, but what else are you using? Is there a file type that you're using, like CAD files, images, audio and video? Some of these are not yet supported, but coming. And then how are you actually transmitting these as well? So do you have a nice, secure extranet, or are you just putting them on Dropbox? And if you look through some of the other sessions about cloud app security, you'll go and find out where your business really are trying to share this information. And then the last part, obviously, is archive. So as we look through trying to apply labels to documents, as they go through the life cycle of they might change the label. Initially, it might be very secret and confidential while we try to formulate it, but at some point at release and onwards, it's then actually public. So that's why we were talking before about being able to change and track why people change the labels. So with that, then we try to build up a framework that says, this is the scenario, and then these are the different ways that we want to try to identify the documents, identify the security requirements, understand what the threat is. So if this information was to get into the wrong hands, how much impact would that have for our business? Because really that gets you down to the knuckles of it, trying to understand where should we put most of our effort and which one should we use rights management on. The rest of them, the labeling, could just be done in the background and not have any impact on anybody, but start to at least catalog our data. Then we look at protect. So what are the right controls to put on? So you want to put the controls on the document store itself or into the access to the data to make sure that people aren't getting the information in the first place. But then we get to the point where we go and detect the information. So now that we've classified and we've got the labels in there, DLP rules are much easier to create when you know what you're looking for. So before, looking for keywords and looking for type of information like credit cards can be done through DLP, but if you've already labeled that information as financial or as sensitive or as internal only, then it's much quicker and easier to say we've already tagged it, identified it, we know what it is, so we can detect it quicker. Then the respond part is to make sure that once we know that the information has leaked or it has gone out to somewhere that we don't want it to go, how can we then revoke access, or how can we make sure that only this partner organization and 3 people in that company have got access to it? And the final part is obviously to build out a cyber response plan to say, well, we missed that piece, that one went out the door, it's too late, now what do we do? And that's probably the harder part for a lot of companies to get their heads around, is how to how to respond once they've already had that problem. Has anybody in the audience yet had an incident where the information is leaked out to, say, the press or to an organization? Yes.
Is anyone not prepared to admit it?
Yeah, one or two. So the 2 times that we get called in, one is they've done an audit and they found there's lots of problems and they want us to come in and try to shore up the ditches before it happens, and the other one is already happened, and then you're trying to go through and patch up afterwards. So although if you have never had it happen before, kind of on the path to it's likely to happen sometime in the future if you don't take part in a cyber response plan. Okay, so how do we do it? Lots of workshops, lots of talking, lots of looking around at the information. This is a really bad... Oh, you can see it? I can't see it. Perfect. So go through the scenario, and at the bottom, there it is. So at the bottom there, we've got this identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Follow the path through, understand what the data is when we're creating it, and then try to work out what is the scenario. So is it the HR department creating a form around maybe some employee? We look at the risks of that information getting out. It could be salaries, it could be their performance, it could be anything. How likely is that data going to get out of the HR department? They probably know how to look after their data pretty well, so they're okay, and you might put them at a lower risk. And this is really like a spreadsheet, and you can score it and give them the opportunity to tell you what is their most dangerous secrets that they would like to get out. And as we work our way through, we then get into, say, protect area, and say, this is the kind of restrictions we want. We just want to put a rule in the email that says this label, anything with this document label on it, is not going outside of the organization. So then on the email server, we would then go and apply a protection policy that said, anything with this label, block if it's not going to one of these domains. So it's pretty simple to set up. And then detect, so we say, well, how are we going to monitor this? How are we going to go looking for it? Where are we going to go looking? Make sure it's in SharePoint. We can do Exchange Online, but where else do we need to go searching for it? Because obviously some of this stuff is manual. You've got to have manual searches now. People go around doing auditing, et cetera. So it's not always about the technology side of it. And then detecting suspicious behavior as well. So you might find that we have a consultant, we've invited him to come and do some work, and then he's downloading 50 documents, 100 documents, on Friday afternoon just before the end of the project. So we might want to detect that kind of behavior as well, that we wouldn't expect people to en masse download this kind of stuff. The last part then is what we're going to do about it if we find out. So how we're going to investigate it, how we're going to have that trail and audit to understand exactly where the document was uploaded to, who's accessed it, where is it now, how can we respond appropriately. And then the recover part is obviously, depending on what's happened to it, if you've got things like a cryptolocker, then it's recovering from backups, etc. But if you've got a document that's been emailed out and you didn't stop it at the doorway, then maybe go and revoke the access in the rights management. So we fill out a form, we send this form around, we have the workshop, give them the form, let them go away and think about it. They come back to us and tick all the boxes, make it as simple as possible to go through the same steps, fill it all out in their own words, what that means to them, giving them some guidance as to what that might look like. We'll collect 10, 20 of these documents and then score them and rate them. So when it comes to actually deploying that then, we understand now where the business wants to head. We're going to do our first deployment. We want to very slowly turn up the dial, if you like. So classification is the first part. We can do that without intruding on anybody's life. They're not even going to know what's happening. We can do it in the background. They wouldn't have to actually manually click anything. We can just have that happen. And then as we go along and start looking at things like visual labeling, well, that's going to suddenly start to impact them. We might want to look at, they're going to have headers and footers, or they might have every email they send out is going to have a little exclaimer in the bottom to say that it's internal only or it's general knowledge. So that's going to start to impact them. You're going to have to do some change control to make sure they understand the users know how to do this. And then rights management is going to be applied when we start encrypting documents. Their recipients might not be ready for that, so they might not be able to open the documents because they haven't got the systems ready. So when we start to turn this dial up and get more and more control, and we start to apply more of the protections, we just want to make sure those partner organizations you are working with that you do want the information to go to are ready for that. So do some tests, make sure they can receive the documents, they can open the document, and if they need to edit it and send it back to you, have they got the controls to be able to do that as well, or do you need to think of a different way of doing it? And then finally, as we get around to the end, we might do monitoring with Cloud App Security or Advanced Security Manager, and then you're going to see that we can go in and just start to revoke access either manually or automatically and start blocking some of these activities, which is obviously going to start to cause some kind of business impact if we were to do this too quick and too soon. So to get a successful deployment, take it slowly. So a couple of screenshots here. If anybody here done DLP rules? Anybody had a successful DLP rules set? Yeah, not as many. So DLP rules, again, they've been there for a long time. They're in the on-premise products and the online products. Slowly, build up slowly, one or two at a time, see how it goes. You don't have to apply actions. So you create a new policy in, say, Exchange Online, and you decide what the scope is. So initially, just create that as a small group of users or just your own account that if this group of users has this access, then this is what I'm going to do with it. And then you can create lots of rules to say, only apply this rule if it's going out of the door or if it's coming in the door, and then exceptions as well. So it's okay if the finance department send this kind of label, but if anybody else is not inside the finance department, they're not sending that information out. Then you can go and modify the rules and say, what is it actually going to do when we find this information? So we can change the subject, the sender, the body of the text, the attachments. We can maybe remove the attachment and just send the email. And then finally, the last actions are, what am I going to do when I find something that hits this policy? Even if I haven't done anything to the email, I've just found this email, then the first thing we can do is just say, send a notification, let somebody know what's happening. You're gathering these logs in the background, then you can go and look at them and see how bad is this in our environment. Because a lot of the time, people can think it's a really bad situation, everything, the sky's falling. So you use these logs to prove that it's only happening once in a blue moon. On the other side, if you're getting a customer, or you've got your managers not understanding just how serious cybersecurity is, turn the rules on, go and find out just how many credit cards are going out via email across your company. So those are the kind of things you can turn on pretty quickly without impacting anybody. Now, when you look at Cloud App Security or Advanced Security Management, if you go back and look at some of the sessions, if you didn't get to attend them this time around, there's some really good sessions on these tools. You'll see that this has got even more options now to scan, not just across Office 365. If you've got Cloud App Security, you can start to do this into Dropbox. So the file's already gone out of your door, and it's gone straight to Dropbox. You could use the same kind of DLP rules to go and look at, are my files actually over there? Now, even if we haven't labeled them, these DLP rules could actually start to look at that classification and try to find that data. Then we can go back along the life cycle, like we showed in the previous slides, to say, let's go and find out where that data was created, who's trying to create it, where are they capturing the data, and go back through that method again. So have a look at them, have a play, scope them down so they don't impact the entire company when you first turn them on, and go from there. So we should probably just get into some demos, really, and start to show how this stuff works.
Cool. Alrighty. So what I'm going to do first, given that you're all generally IT admins, is I'm going to show you what the admin area of Azure Information Protection looks like first. Normally I would start with what the end user sees, but I want to set the context for what it is that we're looking at here. So what you can see here is the Azure Information Protection Administrative Console. Now, when we first set up Azure Information Protection, we get what's called a global policy. And the global policy defines all of the different classifications and labels and the behaviour of those classifications and labels that are available for everyone in your organisation. Now, hands up if you actually got a classification framework done already, documented. One, couple, yep, beautiful. It's really important that you get this work done first, because even though you can change these labels later on and change these classifications, it really helps if you know which of these labels are going to be shown to every user in the organisation. Now, when you set up one of these tenants, you get a bunch of default labels. You get personal, public, internal, confidential, and secret. And you can see in here, I've created another one called credit card data. Additionally to these labels, you have the ability to create what we call sub-labels. So at any point in time, we can further break out what secret actually means. Is it secret for the whole company? Is it secret just for my groups? Is it secret just for executives? And when we build these labels, we get the ability to configure them the way we want them. So you can see here in this particular interface that certain labels have got visual marking applied, certain labels have got protection applied to them already. Now, when it comes to the policy in general, there's a bunch of settings that we can play with here. Now, you'll notice that when you configure your environment, you give the policy a title, which shows up inside the end user's client, and everywhere through this product, you've got tooltips. So if a user mouses over the sensitivity word, what the hell does this mean? We can actually see what's going on there. You'll notice that in a given policy, you have the ability to determine whether or not every document or email must have a label. This is called forcing a label to be applied. If you leave this off, a user can create an email, can create a document, not label it, no one cares, hit save, hit send, let it go. If you're going to be serious about a classification engine, you probably want to turn this on. We want to force the user to classify this, to indicate what type of data it is. And when you turn that on, you get to select the default label. The default label might be, for instance, internal. The default label can be any of the ones that you've created, or the default label can be no label at all. So what do you think happens when you've got a policy that says you must apply a label, but we don't put one on there automatically? I'll tell you what the end user does. The end user gets in there and goes, I can't be bothered clicking anything. And maybe you don't have a rule that's going to find it and automatically do it for you. So they type their document, they go to hit save, and the save button's greyed out. Awesome. So until they click that classification, they can't hit the save button or they can't hit the send button in an email. This is an awesome way to drive your users around the bend if that's what you want to do. Okay? So think about this, right? What we're about to do is about to leave the company under bad circumstances. We've thought about seizing all the FSMO roles into a virtual machine, then deleting that virtual machine. That probably wasn't a good idea. We've thought about going into the on-premises Exchange server and deleting all those EDB files. Yeah, it's been done. Why don't you just come in here, must apply a label, no default label, and watch the carnage happen as you waltz out the door. This is going to be awesome. Nevertheless, valuable stuff. We also have the ability down here too to force a user to provide justification if they set a lower classification label. It's currently classified as confidential. I change it to internal. Bing, why are you doing that? Ooh, okay, maybe I better leave it the way it was. I'm being watched here, I'm being audited. And if we go and look at any of these labels, for instance, confidential, when we click on one of those labels, eventually the internet wakes up. There's a hamster going absolutely mad in a Telstra data centre at the moment, and you can see that we can now start playing with the label itself. Turn the label on or off. Maybe you're testing the label, you don't want it on. What's the label's name? What's its tooltip description? What colour is it? Orange. Beautiful. How about we don't go for silver? It looks like crap, and you can hardly see it. But nevertheless, if you're a silver fan, go for it. I personally like the turquoise, quite nice, goes with the shirt. You can choose what you want. You also get to determine what permissions you are going to set when that label is applied. Am I going to apply protection? Am I going to throw an RMS encryption template onto it? Or am I deliberately going to remove any protection that's there? So for instance, if this label is public and I deliberately choose to classify a document as public and it had protection on it from a previous life, we can remove that as well. One of the great things about working with cloud software is you never know when demoing that piece of cloud software when some piece of shit's going to show up that wasn't there yesterday. And that has happened to me today. Now, thankfully, I knew this was coming soon. I just didn't realise it was going to hit today. So that's what that does. So anyone that's using Azure Information Protection right now, in the last few days. If you haven't looked at the console for the last few days, you won't have seen that before. That's brand new today. So fantastic stuff. Visual marking. Do you want a header? Do you want a footer? What text do you want in the footer? Do you want to put some variable stuff in there so that it makes a bit more sense? What font size do you want? Go for it, 60 point. That's going to be awesome when it hits the printer. What colour do you want? Where do you want to align it? That's all there. And the other thing we have is the watermark capability. So what's the watermark text going to look like? What size is it going to be? Is it going to be diagonal or horizontal? We've had a couple of customers ask for vertical. We told them they were stupid. They got upset. But nevertheless, if you really want a vertical, we're thinking about it. But right now we haven't decided to put it in. And here we have conditions. So these are automated conditions. Am I going to automatically apply this label if I meet this rule? Or am I going to just recommend with a tooltip that you go and apply it? What does the actual conditional rule look like? So we have two types of conditional rules. We have built-in rules or custom rules. In this case, we've got a custom rule. Look for the following phrase, confidential. If you see the word confidential, go and apply this particular label. I can choose to match as a regular expression or not, or I can go with one of the built-in capabilities and select from a small number of built-in regexes that we've put into the product. And we're going to add a lot of those regexes that you see in the DLP rules and Exchange and SharePoint as we go along. So very soon, don't be surprised if you see some Australian stuff there as well. So that gives you an idea of what we can do with the policy. But one of the other things we have the ability to do here is to add multiple policies. So what you've seen here is a global policy that applies to everyone. Everyone gets these labels. But what if we've got certain security levels that are only relevant for the finance department, for instance, and only finance users should see those? We can actually create what we call scoped policies. I'm not going to save any of my edits there because we don't need them. So I can go and create another policy called finance for finance people. And I can then choose which users and groups get that policy from Azure Active Directory. So straight away I can scope a policy to an Azure Active Directory group or user. I could keep clicking the mouse in a desperate attempt for it to actually open the blade to allow me to choose user or group. Can you go and kick that hamster? Has anyone got a Red Bull? There we go. See, the hamster's woken up. And now what we can do is we can choose the user or group that we need. So we simply type in finance, for instance. Choose finance team, select that, click done, and now we have the ability to go and build extra labels that are only for the finance group. So I might go to confidential, for instance, here, and I might go and add a sub-label, like so, and I might call that sub-label finance only. They said the 5 gigahertz was fast. So I'd like to let you all know that I'm actually the General Manager of the Microsoft Phillip Island office in Victoria, and we have much faster internet than I've got right now. We have 2 hamsters running in our exchange. So we'll go with finance only, like so. Yeah, I can configure that the way I need it. I might add a footer, whatever I'm going to do for that particular label. And then once the label name has finished doing what it's got to do, the name already exists, finance confidential, that won't exist. Beautiful. I can save that, and what you'll see in the main view here is that I'll get a sub-label show up under confidential. Now, when I build a scoped policy, it inherits everything from the global policy and then adds on the extra labels just for the users of that group. Oh, it wants me header text. Thanks for that, mate. I'll just turn that off and save it. Now, we should see it appear over here as a sub-label. And there you go. Now, when we open that up, you'll notice that that finance confidential is just scoped to the finance policy. So what this means is when a normal user opens up their Office client, they see the buttons for all of the labels. When a finance user opens their Office client, they see the same buttons as everyone else, but they can now drop down the confidential to see finance only. So what does it look like from the perspective of the end user? Basically, what we do when we build our classification and labelling policy, we then need to go and install the Azure Information Protection client on our end machines. It's essentially an add-on to the Office toolbar. So if I go into my Word document here like so, you'll see that I now have this beautiful little toolbar up the top with all of my different classifications and labels available to me. As an end user, if I don't know what I'm looking at, I can mouse over any part of it, and the tooltips associated with those pieces of information show up. Really useful, because if a user doesn't quite know what confidential means versus secret, then they can simply mouse over that, they can see the beautiful orange bar, and they can get an idea as to what confidential actually means. What colour do we not use? Silver. If I had a giveaway, I'd give it away. But I don't. I have a bottle of water if anyone's interested. Righto. So from an end user's perspective, if we're doing manual stuff and we're not looking for automatic rules, all I need to do is type my stuff. This is not for you to see. Click the confidential, and straight away we've got ourselves a watermark, and we've got ourselves a little footer down there. And because I've used the variable for user principal name, we can see that confidential classified by Macca at maccademo.com. It's all come up there. Fantastic. That's nice. What do you reckon? If you were an American audience, you would be cheering and clapping at this particular stage. Thank you very much. All right. Now, what I want to show you here is we've labelled this as confidential, right? And if you remember looking at the policy before, you'll notice that confidential automatically applied an RMS template to it. So if we go into the backstage view here, you'll see that straight away the document is already protected. So we've picked up the fact that this is confidential, we've picked up the fact that we need to apply a rights management template to it, and we've just done it for you. As opposed to the old way that users had to do it. They had to say, this document is confidential. I think I might need to apply a rights management template. I'll come into here, I'll go protect document, I'll go restrict access, I'll have a look at all of this stuff, and I have no freaking clue what that means, so I'll pick one in the hope that I got it right. So what we've done is we've taken that responsibility away from the end user. We've defined what they need in terms of protection simply by clicking the appropriate classification, and we've applied it to them. All right. Now, in actual fact, I don't think I need this to be confidential anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to edit that, and instead I'm going to choose it as public. And then straight away it's going, ooh, hang on, Tiger. Just think about this for a moment. You are taking a confidential document back down to public. Why have you done that? So we pop up the justification. I've got an option. I can go the lazy option. The previous label no longer applies. Feel good about the fact that I've done that in one click, click confirm, and then move on. Or I can write a bit of War and Peace, and I can explain why I did it. I'm starting to sweat, I'm starting to get stressed, I've moved it from confidential to public. I can put some whiny stuff in there saying, please don't sack me, whatever I want. And whatever I put in there gets audited into the event log, then potentially sent off to a CM system such as OMS or Splunk or something like that, and we can report on that a little bit later on. Now, why don't we try looking at a new document. I want to show you some of the automatic functionality that we've got. So I'm going to create a new document here. And with this document, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick a few... I've decided that the best place ever to store my credit card numbers is in a Word document. Right? Because clearly that's going to be the safest way to do it, right? And then what I'll do is I'll put it on a USB stick somewhere and I'll chuck it in a cab and walk away. So what I'm going to do is just going to go into my credit card numbers here. Now here's a whole bunch of credit card numbers for you. Write them down, start using them. They're not going to work. I'll tell you, they're not going to work because this comes from PayPal. The test credit card numbers page. Good to see that PayPal are still providing us an Australian bank card number even though they haven't existed for 30 years. So if you really want to test out your app and make absolutely certain it's going to work with bank card, go for it. Right? No problems at all. Now I'm going to take all this data and I'm going to stick it into my document like so. There you go, my credit cards. Now I'm going to save that document. I'll just save it on this PC. I'll call it cards. You'll see that I've done many of these demos before. I'm running out of names for this. And it says, rightio then. I think you should label this as credit card data. Why? Because I found some credit cards. This is recommended classification. So it's determined around automatic detection rules. I found the credit card. Do something about it, mate. But this is not a, you are going to label this as credit cards. This is, hey, you want to label this as credit cards, mate? And I can go, well, actually I do. And I can click the Change Now button. Bang, I get the watermark and everything, and it's all good. Or I can say, well, you know what? I don't actually need to label that as credit card data for whatever reason. So the user has an opportunity here to decide their own fate. Now let's look at automatic classification instead. All right, what I'm doing is I've got a new blank document. I'm going to create a brief about my new project called Project Phoenix. And this is a really, really sensitive project, right? So what we've got is a rule here that if we see anything to do with Project Phoenix, we straight away want to encrypt that and want to keep it safe. So when I hit the save button, similar type of thing, call it Phoenix. It's just going to go, nah. That is labelled as secret already. You can tell it's secret because it's big, it's bold, and it's in purple. And we've also added this template to it straight away. It is done. Now, I do this demo a lot, right? And I like Project Phoenix. I just made it up out of nowhere. At one particular customer, I was doing this, right, and I typed in the word Project Phoenix, started talking about Project Phoenix, and the room went dead silent. And things got a little awkward. Everyone started looking at each other. And then, with an accusatory eye, the manager said, "What do you know about Project Phoenix?" And I said, "What do you mean?" It's just what I call it. I made it up. You're not supposed to know about Project Phoenix. I don't know about Project Phoenix, mate. Well, why'd you call it Project Phoenix? I'm like, well, everybody in any company that's ever stuffed something up so badly that you've got to do a project to rise it up from the ashes and fix it has got a Project Phoenix. And that's why I called it Project Phoenix. So when you're doing these types of, if you're showing your company this type of stuff, try and come up with something as bland as possible. I would probably never ever have even done that demo ever again, only for the fact that when I came up with Project Phoenix that day I got caught out like that, and now that is part of the demo forevermore, and that story will always be told. Alrighty, so you can see how we've automatically labelled that stuff. Now, what I want to do is I want to show you how this information is actually surfaced in the email itself. So if we go into the advanced properties here and go into the custom section, you'll see that we write this metadata into the custom metadata. So if we can see we've got a sensitivity tag here, and we can see that we've picked up the secret and the My Group sublabel there. Now that can then be fed into any other type of DLP engine. In fact, right now, this quarter, we're working extensively with Digital Guardian and Symantec to start getting a little bit of integration into their DLP engines. And of course, we have some capabilities in the Office 365 suite as well in order to work with those. Now that's just for a document. If we go into an email, for instance, and go to the properties, we do a similar thing in the mail header as well. So if you've got something like Enterprise Vault and you want to not save stuff up to the cloud that's maybe labelled a certain way, you simply need to find the label that's hidden in this email header. This takes time, and I often miss it, so I'm going to go slow. And there it is there. MSIP label, confidential. So we embed it into the file, into the email header, so that you can capture that outside as well. Alrighty. Now, of course, that's a really nice sort of capability around Office files and around Outlook and Word and Excel and PowerPoint and so on and so forth. But what about those documents that are not conveniently Office format? What if we've got some PDF files that we need to label and protect as well? Well, have no fear, we also have a shell extension in the file system that allows you to do classification and protection as well. So you can see over here, I've got a, where are we? Have I got a PDF file here somewhere? Here's a PDF file. It's actually a PDF of this presentation. If I want to go and classify and protect that particular PDF file, I can simply right-click, and then that will bring up an interface that allows me to not only label that data, but also encrypt that data as well. Now, right now, with this particular product, certain file types are only labelable, if that's a word, if you choose to encrypt them as well. But very soon, in the next few months, we'll have the ability to do just labeling without encryption on pretty much every file type, and I'll give you an example of what that looks like. Now, notice in here, we have the ability to protect with custom permissions as well. Now, this is really important. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this confidential, which is now going to encrypt this PDF file. It's going to turn it into a protected PDF file. And if I want to share this with someone outside my organisation, I can protect it with custom permissions as well. Now, if you're familiar with Azure RMS, you may be familiar with the RMS sharing app. The RMS sharing app, as of a couple of weeks ago, has been deprecated and will no longer be available on January the 31st, 2018. We've rolled all of that functionality into the AIP client that you install now. So if you do want to give someone custom permissions outside your organisation, you choose the permissions you want, you simply type in the email address you want it to go to, or alternatively, you choose the external recipient from your GAL lookup. You can then choose whether or not to make an expiry date for this particular document so that they can't open it after a certain time period. So what I'll do is I'll just go with confidential like so, I'll click apply. And you'll now see that that particular file is a protected PDF. If I want to open that file, I need to have a viewer application that will allow me to open it. So there's an AIP viewer for Mac OS, for Windows, for iOS and for Android. So when I double click on that, you'll see that it opens it with the Azure Information Protection viewer. And this now gets me the ability to see what permissions are assigned to it, to track and revoke it as well. So essentially what I can do is open up the tracking portal, go and have a look at who I've sent it to, and various other things as well. The question was, is there a limitation in the OS? Will this work on Windows 10? Only. Okay. So the query is whether or not this product is only available for Windows 10, I think is what we're asking. So the Azure Information Protection client is available for Windows 7, Windows 8.1, Windows 10. The Office plugin is available for Office 2010, Office 2013, Office 2016. The viewer application is available for Windows, Mac OS, iOS, and Android. Creating and actually classifying and labeling, creating content as opposed to consuming it, is not possible on any operating system except Windows at this point, but that is on our roadmap and it will be coming soon. So the question is there any integration with SharePoint? So can I play around with the classifications for the process of releasing documents externally? So with the current version of the AIP client, we have the ability to synchronize between the classification and a column inside a document library. So what you can do is you can create a column in a document library called sensitivity. That's the one we look for by default. Whatever you set there will then be set in the client as well. Assuming, of course, that your labels match. And we have the ability to do either a one-way sync from SharePoint to AIP or a two-way sync to go back and forth. Yep. All right. So here's my tracking site. I can then go and track that to see who's looked at it, who's had a denial, and where they were in the world when they played with it. The other thing that I wanted to show you is what happens when someone sends me a document they shouldn't. Now here's a document. This is the CXP Security Incentive Program Overview. This is a document that's got to me at macademo.com, and this document was actually locked down by my Microsoft account. So what's happened is this is an internal Microsoft document, and what I've done is I have encrypted it with a Microsoft template, and then I've literally forwarded that to someone outside the organisation. So I'm logged onto this VM as maca@macademo.com. I should not be able to work with this. I should not be able to look at it. The person at Microsoft has encrypted it and sent it to me without realising that I don't have access to it. So when I attempt to open it up, you'll see that it's a protected PDF, so the Azure Information Protection viewer attempts to open it. It's authenticating as maca@macademo.com, but in the use license associated with this document, maca@macademo.com doesn't exist. It's been locked down with a Microsoft template, so it hasn't been shared with me. Even though it's been shared with me, it hasn't been shared within the template. Therefore, I can't open it because I'm not one of the associated users. So straight away it says, go to hell, you're not allowed to do this. And I do have the ability within the viewer program to request permission directly from the owner of that document, who can then click a button and have that updated so the next time I try to open it, I'll be fine. So we've got a whole bunch of bases covered here. Now, that's all very well, but what you've seen up until now is the ability for me to play with data as I'm creating it and as I'm consuming it. But one of the things we get asked quite a bit is, what about data at rest? What if I want to take a terabyte file share and I want to just blat that with a certain classification and a certain label? Well, thankfully, we have an answer for that too. Richard.
Thank you very much.
Would you like to segue there?
Thank you very much.
We rehearsed that for ages.
Ages. So as you can see here, I've got a folder in here which has got a bunch of PDFs, PNGs, PowerPoint presentations. So over in our PowerShell solution here, we've got get AIP file status and set AIP file status. So I've written these out because it's better than trying to type them. So if I just run get, in fact, I didn't reset my last demo. Here we go. Let me just reset this. Maybe do it back to front. So basically, we can run these files, and this can run against an individual file, or it can run against the entire folder and subfolders as well. So we can go and get the current file status of the file, and we'll see that at the moment there's no associated file names, no labels or anything else. So then I can say I want to do a set file status, give it the label name and the unique label identity for it. That should have run, which it has, and said success. And then when I then get that file status again, just go back down and check, you can see there now it's got the internal label. We can see all the details that we would have got from that custom files inside the Word document itself. So it's very quick. Well, on my local PC it is. And then if we want to remove it, like I did before, we can do set file status and then just remove label. So in testing, you might want to take a subfolder full of files that you don't care too much about, completely label the entire set, and then when you're finished, unlabel them all again. But you also want to know how to remove all labels in case you set this against the wrong file store on your corporate network share. So we will remove the files there, and then when we run get again, just to prove that should then say back to normal again. Okay, so now if we do this against a group of files, we can actually run get file status for the entire folder, and then export that to a CSV file. So I'll run that one first, and that one's called before. Just make sure that has a run, that's run. And then I'm going to set the file status. Now, again, inside of that file structure, there is a lot of different file types. So you're going to see that some say success, and then some are going to say skipped. So if I run another check now and say, what was the status afterwards, and then we'll go and look at the CSV files. And that one. Okay. So before, we had no files with any protection. None of the files had any protection. And then afterwards, we get a list of every file, the folder structure they're in, and whether it's successful or not. So the ones that were not successful, and then how are we going to protect these? And as Mac was saying, these ones are PDF files. So we can't protect them with a label only today, because PDF and other file type, non-Office file types are not supported to just do labeling. So instead, what we can do is go ahead and run the next set of scripts down here, which is apply protection and then labeling. So we can wrap the PDF document up in a protection layer, and then we can apply that labeling on top. So I'll just run through and do that one quickly. So we'll do a folder. So this time we will do a get from before. We will do a set. Okay, and then we will do another get. So go back into this folder here. This is under my secret files. So these secret files, you can see there's icons. Well, you can see if I zoomed in. You can see these files have all now got a change of the icon to show that they're protected. And if we go and have a look in the before and after shots, you'll see that this is before. So there's no protection. And then after, everything is protected and labeled. So that's basically the PowerShell as simple as it needs to be for now, and it's based on the fact that you've got labels already. So what you can't do is do, say, custom permissions. So you're meant to define the label first, apply the protection labels, and then point it at your file server.
That is coming, just not for a little while yet. Yeah. There's one other thing I'd like to say about that. So who can see a use maybe for that gigantic 20 terabyte file share, being able to just blad all of that, get it all encrypted, so at least it's pretty safe. Hands up. Anyone can see that for that 20 terabyte file share? Here's what you don't know. When you run that, it's going to change the modification date, and it's going to set the archive bit. What's going to happen to your backup? Your backup is going to feel like it's spent some time in prison. I can tell you that straight away. And you are really going to have to let your backup people know that something is coming down the pipe, big time, because that's going to do a massive backup that day. So I'm not saying don't use it. I'm just saying be aware of what it's going to do. Right? It is going to set the archive bit. It is going to cause a backup to happen. And if the backup team, if you've got a separate one, aren't ready for it, you're not going to be very popular at all. And mind you, if you're just backing up to Azure into a storage account, go for it. Absolutely. We'll take that, not a problem.
So just one last area to show you. We talked about DLP and Cloud App Security as well. So just to show you, this is the Cloud App Security interface. And you can see I've got some alerts already. I've configured this to say if I can find any user storing a secret document in SharePoint, I want to go through and let me know about that one. So one of the alerts will come through and say, this match is secret, I'm just going to tell you about it. But another one we can do is actually carry out DLP actions and quarantine. So when Cloud App Security carries out the quarantine, again, you're going to get the label, you're going to get the alert. You can actually get a text message to tell you this has happened immediately, within a few minutes of it happening. And then you can go down and dig into exactly who shared what, where, why, and when. We're going to see the exact the classification label, and this has been pulled in from Azure Information Protection. So as you create your labels, it's going to update the list of labels you can go through and create policies for. You can again go and see the exact hierarchy of where this document was stored, where it was in my list. And then we can see who the collaborators are. And manually, if we want to, we could actually go through and say, if we want to, maybe I can't on this one. So we can go through and revoke. So basically, you can say actually revoke that one. In the console, that looks a bit like this. So when we say quarantine, the file was put into this documents protected by Cloud App Security, and it took the file away, put it into another folder called quarantined, and then put a text file there just to say this is the list of files that have been removed. So your users can't get access to those files immediately, but they do know that there were some files put in there, and they can go through and view. The other way you can do that is just through SharePoint Online, and you can do exactly the same idea that you search for content where the variable is sensitive equals confidential or secret, and it'll actually put a little red symbol there to say just blocked. Administrator can see it, the owner can see it, but no users can see it. So instantly you're taking actions and stopping this stuff from happening on SharePoint. One very last quick one, and then we'll see if there's any questions. If you want to do this in Outlook, I can send myself an email. So just send. This is outside of my organization. I got some nice juicy news for a friend, but obviously don't share this because that would be bad. But I'll attach my secret file anyway. Big secrets are hard to keep. And then when you send that off, you'll be fine. No one will notice that one unless they look through all the logs and Exchange guys are on top. Instantly it comes back and says, nah, you can't send secret information out. So the user gets that email straight back to them. Now, it doesn't have to go back to them. You can actually just not tell the user you've blocked that at all, send it to their manager instead and get all the security team and get them to go and have a word with them instead. So you've got lots of options. Again, I would say it's quick and easy to set up, but go back and do that whole, what am I trying to protect? Why am I trying to protect it? And record everything you do. Because the worst thing to do is somebody gets this kind of thing and you don't know why you did it. And you're trying to troubleshoot it afterwards is a lot harder.
Cool.
Quick
Thank you.
All right.
Alrighty. So, just wrapping it up, we've got 3 minutes left, so I think we've come out reasonably well on time. So essentially, when it comes to Azure Information Protection, the way we suggest you go about it is, first of all, start off with classification only. We've talked about that already. Get the classification structure down pat, start getting that in, make sure that it's right. Then start adding your automation. What are you looking for? What am I doing recommended? What am I doing automated? Then think about what do I need to protect? Because once you start protecting things, you start restricting access, and that can, if not designed properly, be a little difficult. Then think about how we're going to report. Are we going to take those logs? We're going to stick them in the CM system. Are we going to look at them? And then, of course, thinking about how we're doing that collaboration. Now, if you need help with that, there's a whole bunch of good documentation. And if you're a customer that needs a little bit more help, there's people like Richard and myself. You can get in touch with us. We've got some quite nice documentation around the 5-phase deployment approach. If you want to get access to that, give us a yell, andrew.mcmurray@microsoft.com. I can get you a copy of that document, which is not currently on the docs.microsoft.com site. So in terms of resources, if you want to know more about what's happening in our team, the Twitter account used to be the RMS guy, which is our director, Dan Plastina. It's now twitter.com/Dan Plastina because they got a little bit upset about the fact that he wasn't using his real name. Go figure. The technical documentation is on docs.microsoft.com. If you've been working with docs.microsoft.com recently, you'll know how much better that is than TechNet. Who likes docs.microsoft.com over the TechNet way of doing things? It is so much better than it used to be. If you've got any questions, you can email askipteam@microsoft.com. That's a shared mailbox that we all have access to. So if you send an email to that and you appear to be from Australia, I will get pinged to say answer that email. So it's an easy way to get to me. If you'd like to join our Yammer community, yammer.com/askipteam. That is a closed community, which is really good because it lets us talk a little more freely about what's going on. You won't find many of us talking in the standard TechNet forums or anything like that. So think about that one if you want to get a bit more information. Our IT Pro blog is obviously at Enterprise Mobility. You can download our client from the link there as well, that never changes, and our product page is at Azure Information Protection under the cloud platform area. So, usual standard finish-up slides. Evaluate the session if you liked it. Don't evaluate the session if you didn't. That's generally the way we go in these things, isn't it? You might get a Surface Pro 4 or a brand new Xbox One S. Awesome fun. There's a bit about Ignite. And there you go. You can win a Spark After Dark Drone Pilot Pass. Don't all get too excited at once by completing your session evaluation ASAP. Brilliant. All right, we're going to open it up for questions. If you don't have any questions, thank you so much for attending. And we will see you with a very cold glass of beer very soon. Thank you. Fire away with questions if you've got any.
So the last example there, you added a file to Outlook and sent it on, but you also showed previously that you can use PowerShell to remove the labels. So if you go through and remove the labels, would you still have the same protection, still have those same words fire back through?
So the question is, we showed a DLP rule that caught a document being sent out that was labelled as secret, but we have a PowerShell script that can remove labels. If you remove labels via a PowerShell script, you will break that DLP rule, because what the DLP rule is doing is it's looking in the metadata for MSIP_labels or sensitivity equals that label name. If you've used this PowerShell to strip that, it's no longer there, therefore it won't trip. Absolutely. So the question is that audited? Yep. Sorry, am I stealing your thunder here?
No, carry on. That's fine.
Is that audited? Yes, it is. So every action, whether it's in the client or whether it's done via PowerShell, is being logged to the local event viewer. Now, again, it's local right now. Okay, so very soon, probably sometime mid-ish year, maybe, hopefully, we don't exactly know, that's going to go into the service itself, and there'll be, we'll be able to query that on a dashboard. Right now, it's your responsibility to get those local logs out, put them somewhere central, and then run a Power BI over them or something like that.
You can create a DLP policy as well that looks in the content of the attachment if you want to. So without labeling at all, you could go just look at what content's going out the door before I deploy this solution and use DLP to go find stuff but not take action maybe, and then get the business to properly label it so it allows it to go through the right methods and channels. So.
And that's the thing, there are so many different rules available in those DLP engines. So as Richard said, there's multiple ways to actually find your way out of it.
Any others?
Right, so the question, so the question is, if content has been classified, do we have a way to stop the content being declassified, to stop a user from being able to change the classification? The answer is right now, no. That's why we have the justification capability. We are looking into that at the moment. We don't have an ETA for that, but it is on our roadmap.
Yeah, that's a static label. So you set it to the unique identity. So you can change the name of the label, you can change the text and the wording and how it all works, but it's unique to that label. Only if you deleted the label would you then kind of apply a dynamic one?
Not yet. So the question is there a way to apply a dynamic label to a file share? So I'm going to attack the question in two ways. I just want to add on to what Richard said before around the label. You mentioned somewhere in the first question around protecting. So if we apply a label that has an RMS encryption template associated with it, it will automatically also apply that. So that is one thing. Right now, the sort of functionality you're describing is the idea that I'm putting something into a file share and I'm interrogating the contents of that as soon as it arrives and then dynamically associating the label that I need to it. Yeah. Exactly. So that functionality right now isn't there, but that's definitely on the roadmap, yes. Yeah, we're building that at the moment.
You could probably engineer it to do that, but you'd have to pick a single label for a single folder as opposed to saying based on content, etc.
Offline access. Oh, Quack and I have had some great discussions about that. Offline access. Okay, so offline access is only an issue if you're putting an RMS template onto it, first off. Now, the way an RMS template works is the first time you open up the document, you must contact the service to get your use license associated with yourself. Okay, so first time we open the doco, we've got to get it. By default, that is good for 30 days. Okay, Every 7 days, we will need to refresh that and check it again. So on the 8th day, you need to hit the service again in order to get to it. It's a bit of a pain. Do you want to add anything to that, Quap? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just to clarify that, yeah, you've got a cache lifetime. Now, all of this is configurable, mind you. So you can configure the cache lifetime and the content lifetime. The cache lifetime might be configured, let's say, to 15 days, which means you open it up on day 1, we're sweet. On day 16, it needs to connect again to refresh that, okay, and then it will allow you to keep going. What we are doing at the moment is we're investigating a feature which is on the backlog to allow us to very much function like a DHCP style client, where we'll say, okay, let's say you've got a token cache of 15 days. At day 7, even though you've got another 8 days to go, we'll try and contact the service and refresh it. If we can't, we'll do it again every day until we get there. That's not done yet, but that's not going to take a lot of work, and that shouldn't be too far away.
Just to add to that, so if you want to be able to revoke a document, if you've given them 15 days of offline access, as soon as you click revoke, they've got up to 15 days to still access that content. So if you set it to 0 days, they have to, every time they open it, they have to authenticate. And so if you do revoke, instantly they're revoked. If you set it to say 1 day, at least you know that you've got no more than 24 hours between you revoking it and the person not being able to get access anymore.
It's configurable per template, RMS template.
Yeah, so if you define that template for that partner or for that project, then that project has that configuration. The other way to do it is an expiration date. So if you were to say we're going to do everything up until Friday, as soon as Ignite's finished, no one gets the content anymore, you could have it all expire on Friday, and then nobody could access it on Saturday. Yep. Yeah.
Change. Do you want to answer that, or do you want me to answer that?
I'll let you answer that one.
No change.
Yeah, no change. It's configurable. it is configurable in the
I was
registry,
hoping he'd take the heat for it, but
yeah,
clearly he
no.
wasn't prepared.
It is configurable in the registry. So you'll find this when you're testing, you get a lot of hassle because you're trying to change things all the time. The other problem you get is if you test with one account, you send yourself the email, you've already got full access because you're the owner. So
we know, we understand that's an issue.
yeah, there is a few steps you can go through. You can basically clear down the registry, clear down the cache, refresh again, and it'll pull it all down. But labeling, it's a good question because with labeling, actually labeling works every time you open up Word, it will go down and pull the latest set of labels down. So as soon as you change a label on Azure and publish, it's available to your users immediately.
Yeah.
Labels are fine, RMS, because you don't expect to change RMS policies too often, really. Not change them. You might create them quite often, but changing an existing one is the problem.
So the question is, how sensitive would you say this was to the user in high latency scenarios? Everything happens locally on the client. So the only problem you may potentially have is when you open Outlook, we've got to do a check to the service to see whether the policy has changed. If the policy has changed, we have to download it. Once that's done, everything happens locally on the client, which means you effectively get very little impact. We see very little impact in high latency scenarios. We have one particular customer in Southeast Asia that, so get this, right? Their network is such an absolute, maybe I shouldn't, can we stop recording? We're done. Thank you, everybody. Give me a clap. Cut the recording, right? Tell me when the recording's